Hello and welcome, listeners. It's Jordan, and today we're going to be diving into an important chapter of American history, the Great Migration, a journey that reshaped the lives of millions and transformed cities across the United States. The Great Migration refers to the mass movement of Black Americans from the rural South to urban centers in the North and West, which took place primarily during the early to mid 20th century. People moved for many reasons. I moved to Madison, Wisconsin for college. My grandma and grandpa moved to America to be with family, and people are constantly moving for job opportunities or travel experiences. However, the Great Migration was not the case of being pulled by new opportunity, but also being pushed away. Black Americans moved north, some to urban south, and some out west. While they were being pushed out, they still moved with a dream, the dream of economic mobility, escape from violence, and striving for new job opportunity. The Great Migration was one of the largest internal migrations in American history. Following the emancipation of enslaved people, white Southerners turned to intimidation, violence, and social means to keep Black Americans from voting or accumulating wealth. There was no opportunity for Reconstruction offered by the South, while simultaneously being pulled toward the promise of a better life in northern cities such as Chicago. During the first wave of the migration from 1910 to 1940, the Chicago Defender newspaper played a crucial role in attracting migrants, with headlines like "Come up north and prosper" and "There are more jobs than men to fill them." These stories spread throughout the South, pulling countless individuals to Chicago, ultimately transforming it into a Black metropolis. However, this era was also marked by rampant violence, including numerous lynchings. The second wave of the migration from 1940 to 1970 saw a significant demographic shift, with 90% of Black Americans originally living in the South. By 1940s, this number dropped to 77%, and by 1970 it fell to 52%. This exodus was driven by the oppressive conditions of sharecropping, which trapped many Black Americans into cyclical debt in the South, and the promise of better paying jobs in industries like meatpacking and automobile production in the North. In Chicago, neighborhoods like Bronzeville emerged as cultural hubs, rich in historical landmarks and the roots of jazz and blues music. This legacy established Chicago as a major center for music and the arts, producing legendary musicians and fostering a vibrant cultural scene that continues to influence the city today. Black residents have also played a significant role in Chicago's workforce, contributing to industries like manufacturing and entrepreneurship. Many Black-owned businesses and economic networks established during this period are still thriving today. However, starting in the 1980s, we witnessed a reversal in African American population growth in Chicago, with a decrease of 350,000 Black residents by 2016 from its peak in 1980. This decline is often contributed to factors like violence in predominantly Black neighborhoods, the pursuit of better education opportunities for children, and the search for more affordable living conditions. These demographic trends reveal deep-rooted racial inequalities. As racial disparities in unemployment and wages continues to persist, the degradation of Black residents to the Black Belt and the resulting economic disinvestment have long-lasting effects that become more pronounced in the 1980s. Neighborhood dynamics have become increasingly complex, with gentrification and the destruction of public housing playing significant roles in population shifts. As the second largest city for Black population and political leadership, Chicago remains a vital center of culture and community. Today we'll explore how the legacy of the Great Migration continues to shape the social and environmental landscape of Chicago. We will be exploring this through my guest's eyes, my Uncle Brandon. He will be joining us today in order to give us a unique and authentic perspective on the long-lasting effects and telling us about today's Chicago. Hi, Brandon. Did you want to introduce yourself and give us some backstory on yourself, where you were born? How would you describe your environment growing up?
Sure. Well, first, hello, Jordan. My
Hi.
name is Brandon Antonovich. We are related. Uh, but a background on myself. So I was born, we believe, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I say believe because as a baby, I was abandoned. I was found in Milwaukee. Um, but my actual birthplace and my birth date are the best estimates of the system. From there, I was ultimately adopted by a wonderful family, and I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee called West Dallas, which more of a traditional city than your typical subdivision suburb. My experience was much more like that. Very blue collar, very working class, Catholic. That whole scene that was pretty common in the 70s and then the 80s. As far as the environment and whatnot, I had a great family. It was a unique situation for me because, as you know, I am biracial. And back in the 70s and 80s, that was not as common or accepted as it is today. It's been a massive change. So I did struggle with a number of things as a child, combination of not fitting in because of my race, by being adopted and abandoned. That was issues at time at school. And adding to that, just my normal personality, which is kind of an outspoken personality, very inquisitive, which could be annoying to people. So, my childhood was, it was tough. It was tougher than I would have preferred it to be. But, from that perspective, from community and friends and looking back, the more I reflect on it, the more I find things that were just not positive. That being said, though, that's not with regard to my family. Family's great. I have an older sister, younger brother. As kids, we got along, then hated each other, and then get along again now, which is pretty common. And I had two parents who, while they were not formally educated and worldly per se, they were absolutely loving and did the best that they could for me and taught me right from wrong and how to be confident in myself. And so that's my background.
Yeah, your background is very interesting. I think especially my mother being your older sister, hearing her perspective of your guys' childhood as a white woman versus your perspective is like definitely very interesting. Like how two people in the same environment have very different experiences in it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, was any of those things you mentioned reasons why you decided to move to Chicago, or why did you decide to move?
Yeah, you could say that it was just a buildup over my childhood and growing up in high school and all that. I basically just came to a point in my life where I felt I really wanted to get out. I've always been someone who wanted more than I had, and I don't mean like monetarily, although I'm sure that's part of it too, right? You always want to be, but I wanted more. I wanted to see more. I wanted to meet different people, and I think part of it was stems from like this inner drive of searching for where I belong
Yeah.
and trying to find quote unquote my people. College gave me some more exposure to that and gave me a little bit more confidence as far as doing different things. And when I graduated from college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I went a little bit atypical again from most kids. I jumped into a job and then I left it after a year or so. I was doing fine. Job was good. I just didn't love it. I didn't like it. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was tough. I graduated from school in 3.5 years. I was going to go to law school and decided I didn't want to do that. So I was really in the state of what am I doing? So I ended up moving down to Miami, lived in South Beach for a little bit. And a combination of things basically led me back to the Midwest at that point. One, the environment in Miami, though very ethnically rich and diverse, Caribbean, Cuban, Black, white. It was just a really great mixture of peoples. Where I lived in particular was just a little too over the top. And I missed a little bit of that Midwest. There's something about the Midwest that we can pick on, but it's also wonderful. And so that drove me, and some things I was pursuing at the time. I was pursuing wanting to learn theater and acting maybe. So I came to Chicago since it was such a strong hub for that. And that's what brought me to Chicago.
Oh, wow, really nice. What do you do for work now?
What I do for work is something completely different. I work at a large global financial accounting and advisory firm. And I work in the technology field, specifically with generative AI right now. And a lot of what we're doing is just trying to explore the technology and how it can be implemented into not only our firm's experience or my peer professionals, but also how it can be financially leveraged and sold out in the marketplace and support the services that we already do.
Oh wow, really, really
No,
cool and
seriously, we were
interesting.
actually just talking about that
Um,
What time?
in this class that I'm doing this podcast for. It's like my environmental studies, and we are just reading about how AI and like ChatGPT and stuff is like we read an article just saying that it actually uses a lot of language stemming from like African businessmen and that they use words like delve and like other words like that that are very common in like African businessmen language, but not common on like internet or where you would think like generative AI is getting its language.
Oh,
huh.
right. Well, that stems to where you're building your models from and whatnot. But well, I was not aware of that part, but that wouldn't necessarily surprise me.
Yeah, no, we were just reading about that, so I thought that was like cool that that was brought up. Um, how would you describe your current neighborhood and your current environment that you live in?
We live in the city. So when say we live in Chicago, we live in the city. We are in a neighborhood called Wicker Park, and Chicago's a really interesting city because when you think about migrations and transition, Chicago, not unlike New York, has gone through tons of immigrant transients, like coming through the city. In fact, it's one of the things that helped continue to build the population for Chicago over the last 2 decades. Is it's still a landing place for many immigrants.
Hmm.
And so the neighborhood I'm in went through a lot of different phases. Heavily Polish for the longest time, and then German and Norwegian. But then just before we moved in, it was the hip neighborhood. It was the neighborhood that went from blighted, so it had gone through its peak, had gone down, was going through tough periods. Then you had the gay scene move in and the artist scene, and then everyone who wanted to hang with those cool people started to move in. And now our neighborhood's a really, it's an established gentrified neighborhood. Um, it's not diverse when it comes to ethnicity, or the diversity is more of the Asian um, type. So, you
Yeah.
know, uh, Asian, including India. Um, and it's not as socioeconomically diverse as it once was either. It was a
Yeah.
real working class, and now it's a much more affluent neighborhood.
Yeah, and you saw this like transition over the last, you said like 25 to 30 years you've lived there now?
Yeah, I've been in Chicago for, geez, yeah, 30, just about 30 years. Yeah, 30 years. And yeah, I didn't live in this neighborhood right away, but I'd been coming to it and frequenting it. And, even just in the last 10 years, it's gone through a significant change. And I think COVID escalated that with
Oh
the
yeah.
shutdown of so many stores and whatnot. But it's the nature of things. People want to go where it's less expensive, and that's usually the more risky or adventurous people, or
Yeah.
people who are more ostracized. And then once the neighborhood starts to get cool and cool people are doing things there, then everyone else moves in. So yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, it's still a nice neighborhood. We're fortunate, good local school, neighborhood school, but you know, it, it's Chicago's a very diverse city, but it's not as integrated as it once was. But again, I
Mhm.
think that's more socioeconomic driving that right now versus in the past.
Yeah. This kind of goes along with what you were kind of talking about, but noticing like remnants of segregation in your daily life, in your neighborhood, schools, social interactions, any specific like examples that come to mind?
Yeah, I thought about this question, and I'd have to say, on a personal level, not much,
Yeah.
and that's twofold. One, because being biracial, I straddle this line where not I don't seem as my perception. I don't seem as dangerous or offensive or whatever to a lot of people.
Hmm.
Um, and I think growing up the way I did, the way I speak, the what I listen to, like my whole culture is white.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I don't run into it as much. I mean, you do see it's a silent. What I do see is silent. So when
Yeah.
kids or people, excuse me, talked about our school, when we first went to our school, and we were trying to encourage other parents in the neighborhood and really develop it into a great neighborhood school, you had a lot of, well, what's the student population like? And these very
Yeah.
disguised questions, which is not surprising. And it's not surprising to me, although some of my friends were like, people would ask you that. I'm like, yeah, like they don't see me as a threat. They don't see me as quote unquote black. So they'll
Mhm.
ask me questions, or they're asking me because they're like, well, I perceive he's a good black, so we'll ask him and he'll tell us.
Yeah.
So it's more of that, but like our boys, your cousins. Our youngest is very light skinned, looks like an all American white boy. Our oldest has more of an ethnic,
Yeah.
and some would say like maybe mixed because of his hairstyles and whatnot. And he's had one or two just not like I experienced, but he had one or two instances where he had to like just say to some of his friends, "Hey, man, that's not cool."
Yeah.
Um, so it's not a daily. It's the only other thing I would say, and this is as far as remnants of segregation, like if you ride public transportation, the folks that you see that are struggling or are panhandlers,
Yeah.
I would say 95% of what you see are black people.
So kind of
Black.
the like socioeconomic
It,
disparity that you still see.
it's socioeconomic, but that socioeconomic impact came as a result of
Yeah.
the positivity of the Great Migration, but then also like the negativity of that. You got too big and too scary, and then all of a sudden people started reacting.
Yeah. I feel like we might have already kind of answered this. How's your experience in Chicago changed over the years? Do you have anything to like add outside of like the neighborhood you were talking about?
Yeah, I just as a whole, Chicago, you know, the thing that we're experiencing right now, which I don't think is unusual to a big city, is a lot of the kid gatherings, where they get a little crazy, cause a little trouble,
Yeah.
uh, stuff like that. And those groups that are forming tend to be almost all black. Not even like, oh, mixed black and white, mixed black and Latino. No, it's like almost all black kids. And that definitely continues to exacerbate the sense of lesserness or less than that some people have in black kids, and black people as a whole. And in our
Mhm.
neighborhood, while it's a good neighborhood and it's safe, when you have an affluent neighborhood, that's the neighborhood people target. So we've
Yeah.
had our fair share of muggings and kids running up on in a car, jumping out, mugging someone, and they all tend to be black youth, and it's really frustrating, um, because it's like anything. If you are of any kind of a minority, if you're a woman, if you are of a certain ethnicity, if you're black, and people see something happen, you are now representative of the entire group.
Yeah. There's
And
weight on that.
yeah, and so it's just unfortunate. So that's, to me, that's the biggest things I've seen happening around the city. A lot more of that kind of action, and unfortunately negative attention as a result.
Why do you think you've seen that more recently, like increase?
I think there's a number of reasons. COVID, we have to just say is a huge one, because the impact that it had on so many businesses and shutting things down and closing people off
Yeah.
and keeping kids out of school. Um, you have that. The Chicago public school system went through a massive um, reduction of schools, closing schools. This was about 12 years back now, maybe 15 years, and it, I agree with that they needed to do it, and that's a whole nother conversation about how much
Yeah.
money is being spent and all that. But in doing so, and where the schools were shut down, it left a lot of kids in situations where they couldn't get to their new school easily. Our city's pretty strapped financially. We have some legacy financial issues the city's dealing with, so the busing's less, and all
Mhm.
these things basically creates scenarios where the kids who are in these neighborhoods that are affected, um, aren't getting to schools, and they have time on their hands, but they have nothing else to do, no jobs, no nothing, and they start to get a little crazy. And it goes back to what I was saying before. If people are misbehaving and they don't look just like you, it's going to stand out so much more, and that's going to create more fear and more bias, and that's what's happening. So to me, it's less of that traditional, what people think of racism, like, oh, those people are just dumb because they're just dumb. Like there was enough progress made for a while to say that, hey, blacks are just like whites, intelligent, athletic, nice, church going, da da da. but um, there's been such a history of systemic racism in our country that
Hmm.
it's going to take more than just a couple decades to turn that around. And now I feel like there's been a slip back, but less about, oh, we just don't like black people, but because the socioeconomic situation has put us into this difficult
Hmm.
time. I don't know.
Yeah. And like going off of that, so many factors you just named, I feel definitely are contributing to this next question of the decline in the Black population in Chicago since the 1980s. It was a trend of increasing population from 1910s to around 1970s, and then a decrease after the 80s, which was at its peak. Why do you think Black people are moving out of Chicago and into other cities?
Well, you know, there's a part of it is racism. Like, they don't feel like they're being treated fairly. There's not opportunities for them. There's a number of suburbs just outside of Chicago, namely on the south side, Homestead, Flossmoor, Chicago Heights is one, where there's communities there's black communities, and so there's a feeling of safety and more support and whatnot. So there's definitely that piece, but the other piece is just as the Midwest lost manufacturing, Chicago, like Milwaukee, like Detroit, St. Louis, they all lost mass of jobs.
Yeah.
And, while there's great concern that the white man's losing his job in this country, um, the uneducated white man is struggling, sure, but the uneducated black man's struggling too. And for better or worse, there were more uneducated black men. And so all of a sudden, these jobs are being eliminated, and there's nowhere else for you know a black man to get a job, and black man and black woman for that matter. But
Yeah.
so without the jobs, people keep slowly peeling off, and the other piece again around the socioeconomic. And I know it's like I think the reality is the underlying impact right now that's driving everything in Chicago is socioeconomic. That being said, it affects different groups to a different degree. And the black population in this city, more so than like even the Latino, there's still strong family networks. There's still many people coming here. They're migrating willingly to Chicago, fleeing situations that, necessarily weren't strong in their own country, where again, because of the history of the blacks in America, you're trying to make do with the best of a situation that you didn't necessarily create. Although you could argue moving to the north, the Great Migration, no, the blacks created a situation for themselves. Yeah, but they never wanted to even be in the South to begin with. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's, anyways, I'm going off here a little bit, but
No, but you're definitely right. There was so many push and pull factors. The North were spreading the word that there was jobs open for Black people to have if they migrated to the North. Like it was definitely both push and pull.
well,
They were
it's
almost
making
left
the best.
without a decision. So
Yeah, it's making the best of a situation that you didn't want to be in, anyways. I mean,
yeah, right.
the Africans that were in the South would have preferred to stay in the countries that they were in before they were, or maybe they were born there, but because their parents had been, you know, uh, picked as slaves. But anyway, so that last piece of Chicago, as far as the migration is, the cost of living in Chicago is, still fairly high, and
Hmm.
you know, if you're not getting all the services that you need, we have really high financial costs due to pensions and unions, which have a real positive impact, but also a strong negative impact financially on the city. And it's expensive. And if you're working jobs that don't pay you enough, you're not going to stay in the city.
Yeah.
Um, so that's, to me, those are the three key things that are driving that population decline within the Black community.
Moving on to more of the like environmental factors of your environment, how do you believe the legacy of the Great Migration influences like current social and environmental landscape in Chicago? Particularly, like, do you ever notice differences in water quality, air quality, green space, things like that differing from different areas of Chicago?
To answer that last question, yes, absolutely. Not as much air or from water quality, not from the sense of drinking water. I think like throughout the city, you're all pretty good. Water from like the lakefront, and maybe, are you near where there's factories and it's pumping, although they can't do it anymore, where, things were pumped out into the lakes? Yes. Air pollution, absolutely. The south side is where the majority, and I mean strong majority, of
Yeah.
Blacks live in Chicago. And, part of that was due to the different housing projects that were created. And I don't say that as a negative, because at one point, the housing projects that were set up, they were great. They were communities. They were low rises, huge Black thriving communities. And then the South Side, as a result, thrived as well. But as
Mhm.
things changed, the different issues we talked about, that's led the South Side to be much more challenging. And, when you have, this is also, I should add, this is also taking place significantly in the Latino neighborhoods and Latino communities. But when you have these neighborhoods that were predominantly working class and, just factory jobs, those factories, the people are less educated because they're not doing white collar jobs. They're losing their jobs. They're getting more closed off. They don't have a voice. And so when a new company has to come in or wants to come in, and we want their tax revenue, and we're like, oh yeah, let's put you down here on the South Side. So there's a massive, massive area of space that's undeveloped still now for, gosh, it's been at least 20 years they've been trying to develop. It would be the largest urban development in the nation if
Wow.
it were to ever come together. But it's where the old U.S. Steel plant used to be, and it was a huge employer, not only of Black Chicagoans, white Chicagoans as well, but just working class. And it's on the South Side. And when it left, it just left its whole, brown site there, basically. So that's brutal. But, I will say, as far as green space, Chicago is, I don't like to use this word and I want to take it out of context, but Chicago is blessed with a fair amount of green space for such a big city. We have some great preserves and all that. And they are, the preserves and they're spread out in the city. But that being said, if you take a look at a map, and you check the heat indexes and whatnot, and where the green space is, the South Side does have less than the
Yeah.
North Side, which is predominantly white and more affluent. And the quality of some of those spaces is not as high. And the biggest difference there is not because the Park District, I believe, is trying to favor anyone. The Park District is strapped across the board. But I think in the more affluent neighborhoods, you have families that can come together, do fundraisers, and do all that. And so they can supplement the parks and the schools with things that neighborhoods on the South Side can't. And so you
Yeah.
get this double dip of gap being created between, Blacks and other Chicagoans.
Mhm.
Did that answer your question, or did you?
Absolutely. No, that was I really didn't know if you were gonna like say that you saw any like differences in like these different like environmental factors. So hearing that really like put a lot in perspective, I feel, for me. Like I didn't know it would be that prominent that, that you would notice or that you
Yeah,
know.
no. One last little story I'll tell. Like, so, well,
Mhm.
two things. One, when the boys were young, we would just go on the train and we would ride the L train around Chicago because they thought it was fun. It was an inexpensive way to spend time with the kids and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we would go to the one end of the line to the next. And so, depending on which train line you're on, it would either end on the far west side or the far north or the far south. And one particular day, we were going down through one of the south sides, and Leo looked out the window and he's like, "Dad, why are all the buildings boarded up?" And so as we were going slowly south, you could see like the neighborhoods, like buildings less lit up, then buildings closed up and gated, and then buildings with boards on them and then burnt out. Not all neighborhoods. Again, I don't want to perpetuate the stereotype that the
Yeah.
South is just poor, but there was you would never see that on the North Side, and it just goes to show, like on the South and Southwest sides, just how much was just kind of abandoned as the population shrunk and opportunities, withered. And then the other examples, again, my older son, Leo, we went down and we volunteered at this event over the holidays in this neighborhood called Chicago Heights.
Hmm.
which at one point was massive, big, bustling, really great place to live for a middle class person, great blue collar jobs and whatnot. They lost all their jobs, things went down, and again, predominantly black neighborhood. And when you go there, I mean, it is straight out of a movie
Yeah.
that you like pull down the street and there's like nobody and everything's closed down.
Um,
It's very sad. And you look around and like it was so unbelievably stereotypical, like broken
yeah.
playground equipment, all this stuff, and you're just like Jesus. And
Hmm.
this is, you know, 10 miles, but it could be those 10 miles could be, hours away from
Yeah.
the city, and it's like the downtown, the center of the city, and it's crazy to think how much of a gap there is there.
Yes, like the just how close it is, but how different it is shocking. Like
Yeah, yeah. Hi.
that was wow, that was a really, really interesting story. Um,
Mhm.
okay, next question. What environmental or social justice work have you participated in while in Chicago, or just what work have you seen in your community?
Well, I have to be honest. I am not a huge um I'm not a huge go out and march type of guy. So I
Mhm.
don't tend to get um into a lot of social issues like that. I tend to be more of a write letters, call, attend a meeting, and but that being said, Chicago has its fair share. Obviously, during the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of marching and protests, not only downtown, citywide, central, but also out in neighborhoods like our neighborhood. And we did participate in that. There's a number of protests. There was the million women, million women
Mhm.
march. Was that what it was called? And though that was across all races, the black community is massive. Where I see the biggest push for social change in Chicago. Tons of social agencies, social service agencies, nonprofits, all that is within the black church. The black church is still pretty big within the black community, and they're very vocal about
Yeah.
wanting changes. And then the other thing is things like the unions. So the Chicago Teachers Union, the SEIU, so service industry, I can't remember what the rest of it stands for. The service industry, those areas where you have a lot of Black Chicagoans employed, those organizations tend to try to rally people and get them aware of social justice issues. So our school system right now is a big, what's the word I would use? Is a big battleground for
Yeah.
social issues. You have people who say, hey, let's just get the school ready and we want the best computers and this and this and that. And then you have other people saying, so many of our students don't have breakfast. Like they can't get breakfast at home.
Yeah.
We have to have time for breakfast. They need more social workers. They need this.
Mhm.
And that by far impacts the Black population, which is
Yeah.
a massive part of our school system. And there too, though, you're seeing a decline. You're seeing kids dropping out of the school system. So,
Yeah. How do you think with those like issues you just listed, if you have any opinions on how or any of the kind of slow violence topics we've talked about today, could be addressed?
I will be honest, and this probably makes me to a certain degree as much of a part of the problem. I don't know.
Yeah.
They there's as far as stopping the violence, you've got this catch-22 where you have this push for like defund the police, have more community support or conflict avoidance groups and whatnot. And I
Mhm.
do believe that there's some validity to that. Um, Not necessarily defunding the police as far as like getting rid of police officers, but maybe defunding them so they're not buying more like SWAT tanks
Yeah.
and like all this huge military gear, like they're in a a war torn environment, and maybe put a little bit more of that towards the community engagement.
Hmm.
So you have things like that, but I mean the the embedded racism, which is a different podcast for a much longer time. The embedded
Yeah.
systemic racism is so strong and so deep that I don't believe that people inherently now want it to continue or would believe in perpetuating it. I do believe society as a whole is better, even though it doesn't seem that way on television.
Mm.
We have our bad apples, we have our small, but I think they're just more vocal and
Yeah.
that they don't reflect the greater good. That being said, it's extremely difficult to change a system because as you change the system to help one person, either A, there's a perception that then someone else is being hurt, they're losing out on something,
Hmm.
or you just don't have enough money in general to do anything. And I, I don't know. And I feel somewhat embarrassed and somewhat frustrated by having that response. But I don't know what the answer is other than, within your community, trying to do the best you can to be open, embrace different groups. Like the boys go to a school that actually is fairly well, what's it called? Integrated across races. The white is still the largest ethnic group, but I think it's like 30%. No, not even that. It all between Black, Latino, Asian, and white, it's fairly close. Now, white is higher, but
Yeah.
it's much more diverse than I realized because I had gone and looked it up. And so as a result, our Leo, our older son, he's not, he has Black friends, but he's not as integrated into the Black culture, just by the nature of who he connected with right away, the sports he plays, where our
Yeah.
younger son is much more integrated into the Black community
Mhm.
at his school. And I think a big part of that is they're both athletes, but in Henry's case, he plays sports that are more predominantly played by Black kids, which is football and basketball,
Yeah.
whereas our older son played soccer. So, that's a factor too. But sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but the point is like trying where you have opportunities to engage with someone, being as open as you can to be curious, not curious in the sense of, hey, how do you do that? Why is your hair like this? What's going
Yeah.
on? Da, da, da. Like those ridiculous questions that people would ask. Just being open to when someone says something, be like, oh, that's interesting. Like, have you had an experience like this before? No, okay, and not going into the whole why and whatnot, but just
Mhm.
taking it in and letting someone feel comfortable enough to open up a little bit. And you know, uh, I, to me, that's like what you can do. I'm involved with volunteering with my company. We'll go and we'll do events, and I don't do the big like, hey, we're all going to just stand in a group and paint a wall. I'll go into the communities and do like teaching in the classrooms and trying to help expose kids and let them see that even though I'm not traditional, there's different ways to get through things, and
Yeah.
just so yeah, that's. But from a governmental like Brandon, what's that magic pill?
Yeah.
I don't think there is. I think it's just small steps, and hopefully people, you know, step up.
I definitely agree. I think like that question's very difficult question for anybody to answer, so definitely don't. To your point of being embarrassed, I think your answer was really great. And I definitely agree with the point of that while racism's still prominent today, it's a lot of it so unconscious that like as a conscious society, I think we've taken so many steps to not keep perpetuating like the past and things like that. But that there's still so much going on because it's ingrained into our system and it's so unconsciously done some of the time.
Yeah, I will say your generation is a big step forward. Like I'm at the back end of that. The baby boomer generation, for the most part, they're gone. That's like nothing's changed with those folks, and they had way too much influence.
Yeah.
And a lot of the racism was up in those ranks.
Hmm.
But our generation is better. I mean, my experience as a child, it wasn't perfect. I mean, your mom's boyfriend of your mom's, I had issues with him to this day that I still can't really uh, get over.
Hmm.
Um, so I had those things in my life, but they're definitely better. I think your generation's much more like, why does it even matter? I think the Black culture has been embraced so much as
Yeah.
far as like their style. Um, and so it's as long as there's a true balance there, and it's not just becoming a caricature of like, oh, let's just steal their trends and who cares. But it seems like there's so much more biracial relationships happening and whatnot. So I have hope that things will continue to get better.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, though, the only thing that will really make it different is as you and your fellow students and like that next generation get in, that we make changes in the system itself. It's
Yeah.
important for us to be individuals and make differences, but as we get into those positions of companies and government, that we're taking a step back right now. And again, it's a much longer conversation where we are with the current administration. Um, Politics, like straight politics aside, just from a racial perspective and what they're doing, we're taking steps back. So
Yeah.
it's really going to be important that that next wave, you know, basically claws those things back and puts them back on the front.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those were really good points. That was a really good ending point. I think to end off, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more, kind of on a good note of
Mhm.
Chicago culture, Black culture in Chicago. Still a cultural hub with historic landmarks, jazz, blues music, roots, and community institutions that still have carried on since Great Migration times. And just if you wanted to talk about anything you're a part of, been to, interested in.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd have to say that my buddy George, who is black, and he didn't grow up in Chicago, but he grew up partially in North Carolina and then up in New Hampshire. And his experience, like when we became friends, he opened me up to a lot of things because he comes from a traditional black experience in that black family, black parents. He's atraditional in that, or atypical, in that his parents are both educated and extremely educated. Like one was the dean of sciences, one was the dean of students at major East Coast universities.
Mhm.
Um, but that being said, like George and I will go down and we'll check out different things in the black culture. Like there's the Pullman neighborhood, which was predominantly a black neighborhood when the Pullman rail car company was here. All the black workers, and there's a couple art galleries down there that display black artists' work. So
Mhm.
going down to that, Theaster Gates, who is now world renowned artist from Chicago here, he has a number of things, exhibits and whatnot that show. So there's a lot of art in that sense. There's also then a lot of the ethnic festivals. So you can go to that and experience, and it's when you go to some of those, it's not just like Black American experience, music, hip hop, all that. It's also like Afro Caribbean and then
Yeah.
maybe even Afro, like just straight African, like Nigerian and whatnot, Tanzanian, because you have this immigrant population. So, I mean, we've been talking about blacks as Black Americans, but there's also a small population of blacks who are truly African Americans, people who have migrated here or immigrated here. Um, so you have that, and then you have like the Chicago DeSalvo Museum, which is great to go see the experience and success of different blacks, not only prominent within the Chicago area, but then also just broader and the impact it's had. And if you're the type of person who learns about your city, you are going to learn obviously about the black culture, but there are some pretty prominent black people that have made history. Lakeshore Drive, which has now finally been renamed DuSable, is from a black explorer
Hmm.
who is the one who established a fort here in Chicago. And so there's these areas in this history, but you do have to search it out. Um, so I mean, as far as the jazz clubs and what I'm not I'm not a jazz person, but
Hmm.
we've been to a couple of jazz clubs. Or one thing that I lament that I was never able to get to is there was a comedy club on the South Side, and it was like the old school, small. It was run by this same lady. I cannot remember her name now, but for like 40 years, and
Wow.
tons of black comics had come out of there. And she ended up passing, and the place closed down. But it was one of those things where in the South Side there was this massive hub within the black community, like kind of like the different jazz places where people could come out, or blues where they could come out and then like represent Chicago. This
Hmm.
this comedy club, and I love comedy, so I'm really bummed. And then obviously culturally, Chicago, this is more like pop culture, but we are a basketball city, and it's still,
Yeah.
when you go around the city, there's still so many places and courts where you just see like a whole community embracing itself, and it's nice. I mean, sometimes it can be not the best situation, but for the most part, positive. So I don't know if that speaks to what you were looking for, but
No, it
that,
it definitely does. Yeah. No, that was great to hear. Kind of, we were talking about in class kind of this concept of damage centered research, um, instead of like an alternative approach of only focusing on the bad, not focusing on the actual community that faced that bad and came out, still thriving and surviving. So I definitely like to hear about like the culture that's still prominent and thriving in Chicago rather than the violence and all of that that's still perpetuating from the Great Migration, that there are both good things and bad things.
yeah, no, there's definitely, the problem is it's the negative is what, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
And, things do happen. We need to be aware of them, but there's more positive coming out of Chicago. I mean, hell, it was just like a month ago? No, this must have been at the beginning of the school year where like the youngest, this black girl from, I forget what name, was accepted into, I don't know, Howard or something. She was like the youngest
Oh,
college student or something like. I could ask Jill. I'd have to go look it up. I think she knows about it too. But I mean, there's some real great smart people coming out of the city, and showing that, hey, we are more than just troublemakers. But yeah, that doesn't hold people's attention as long.
yeah. hmm I just wanted to say thank you so much, Brandon, for coming on and being my guest for this episode and talking about the impacts of the Great Migration and what it's had on your environment in Chicago. You were an amazing guest. I love all your answers. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Jordan. Anytime. I look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thank you.
In creating today's podcast, I aim to highlight the profound impact of the Great Migration on Black Americans. Through my visual depiction, I drew of migrants in the middle of the street between Chicago's South Side and North Side. The artwork aims to show the contrasts and challenges faced and touched on by Brandon in our interview, such as vibrant jazz clubs and comedy scenes that thrived alongside areas with less green space, less affluent buildings, and the ongoing disparities rooted in historical segregation. Brandon's insights about the cultural richness of these communities, juxtaposed with the economic hardships and environmental disparities, helped deepen my understanding of how migration shaped and was shaped by systemic issues. This podcast directly relates to our class discussions on the Great Migration, environmental degradation, and the lasting effects of colonialism on minority populated areas. It's a reminder of how history, environment, and social justice are interconnected, and it underscores the importance of recognizing these disparities to work towards a more equitable future. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I really look forward to hearing your guys' comments. Thank you.